Linda Hathaway was born in 1871. She is Adelaide and John Hathaway's second child. After her sister Doris was married, it was just Linda and her parents. That was fine in the beginning. Soon Linda had become bored. Every day was filled with reading and chores. She wanted something new. She found that in a boy. His name was Angus. The two were inseparable. Linda was madly in love with him. At that same time, her father John worried about her sister. They hadn't heard from her since the wedding, and it had already been a year. He talked to his brother about it, and they both agreed it was unlike her to not keep in touch. His wife Adelaide had the same concerns. They decided to move so they could be closer to Doris. They told Linda that they were moving, and she wasn't happy to hear it. She didn't want to move. Her life with Angus was just beginning. John told her unless they were getting married, she had to. That Angus didn't come from money and couldn't afford to legally marry her. She asked if she could at least stay with her uncle, but a boy wasn't a good enough reason for that. Linda was able to say goodbye to Angus before leaving. She really didn't want to go. In 1888, they moved to the city Doris lived in. Linda stayed up in her room crying and rarely ever came out. She missed Angus so much and was terribly homesick. She argued with her father any chance she got. She blamed him for her misery. It wasn't long before Linda realized she was more than homesick. She was pregnant. That made her resent her father even more. John was infuriated to hear about Linda's pregnancy. Adelaide told him the baby was coming regardless, and that he needed to make things right with Linda before it was too late. Knowing she was right, John wrote a letter to his brother telling him to find Angus. Once Christopher read the letter, he immediately went to find him. Meanwhile, Linda's stomach was growing. She couldn't wait to meet her little one. She was grateful to have her mother's support. She soon gave birth to a little girl. She named her Agnes, after her father. She looked so much like her father that Linda was sad that he'd never get to know her. She held that grudge against her father and refused to speak to him. She wouldn't even allow him to hold his granddaughter. Her mother was the only one allowed to hold and care for her. While they were at home, John went around town asking about Doris and her husband. Benjamin Black was well known for his scandalous reputation. Everyone knew where he lived. Once he had the address, they went straight there. Doris was relieved to see them after so long. John and Adelaide had finally met their grandchildren. When they sat down, Doris told them everything that happened. They assured her that they were going to help her. As soon as Benjamin came home, they told him Doris and the kids were coming with them. He refused to let them leave without a fight, so John showed him what a real man looked like. Before things could get any uglier, they left. Doris and her children were finally free of Benjamin. Linda was happy to talk to her sister. It was nice to be together as a family again. A couple weeks later, John received a letter from Christopher about Angus's whereabouts. The young man and his parents had apparently died in a fire a few days after their move. John was devastated to hear that. He didn't know how to tell Linda. That afternoon, Linda and Doris were at the park with their children. Seeing their daughters play reminded them of when they were young, and they reminisced on their childhood together. Agnes started to fuss, so they decided it was time to go home. That was when they noticed Doris's daughters were gone. Both girls were too young to walk too far without being noticed. Hoping they were nearby somewhere, they immediately started searching for them. They would look everywhere. By the time it was dark, it was clear they wouldn't find them. When they went home, Doris told her parents what happened. They promised to help her look as soon as the sun came up. By then, John had built the courage to tell Linda about what happened to Angus. He told her he'd been trying to find him, that he had passed soon after they moved. She was in such shock she refused to believe him and screamed that she hated him. Linda ran to her room where she cried all night long. John realized his mistake and worried that he may have damaged his relationship with Linda forever. The next morning, Doris found a letter from Benjamin stating if she wanted to see their kids again, she had to leave her family and never speak to them again. As much as she loved her family, she wanted to be with her daughters. She wrote them a letter that explained she had found their daughters and she was going to be with them. She didn't want anyone to worry about her. She then packed her things and left. Her family would never hear from her again. Linda was so hurt about her sister and Angus, she would cry herself to sleep every night. Being with Agnes helped her heal. She looked like him more and more every day. Years went by, and Linda still didn't talk to her father. She would often take Agnes to the park to avoid him. While she was there, she was approached by a painter. He asked if he could paint a portrait of her and her daughter. She agreed, and he painted a beautiful portrait of them. When he was done, he gifted it to her, then they went home. Linda admired the man's work and found herself staring at it every day. She also thought about the painter and how handsome he was. She soon returned to the park to find that he was there. She learned his name was Hugo, and he was just as interested in her as she was him. He took her on a date to view art, and they had a wonderful time. Soon they were engaged. They moved into a farm together in 1891 where they eloped. There they lived as a happy little family. Hugo and Agnes bonded over art. She admired his work more than anyone else. After some years, Linda and Hugo were expecting. They were all thrilled to bring a new addition to their growing family. In 1895, Daisy May was born. After her birth, Linda reflected on her past decisions. She wanted her father to know his grandchildren, even if she blamed him for losing Angus. So she made amends with him and introduced him to Daisy. John was grateful to be on better terms with Linda and even more thrilled to spend time with his grandchildren. Linda would go on to have more children. Willem in 1897, then Anthony in 1902. Linda was forever grateful to have such a beautiful family.